right, awesome. So I'm a huge advocate for opening up on mental health, and I'm really excited for this episode. Because genuinely, I believe we can open up the conversation and normalise it for people. It can only be a good thing, and hopefully it will lead to more people opening up and seeking advice and help related to mental health. So for those of you listening today, I am joined by Daniel Gaebler. Hopefully I've pronounced your surname right, Dan. So Dan's a business owner and an author. Dan has recently written a book specifically tailored in the men's mental health space called The Centered Tradie. Dan's mission is really admirable. So it's to change the way men think and how leaders can have a greater impact in small businesses, specifically for their employees' mental health. Dan, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. Did you want to give us a bit of an intro to you, who you are, your background?
Yeah, of course, and thank you for having me on. So background, I guess, as I say in the book, a sort of really normal Aussie guy, normal Aussie childhood that grew up in the southern suburbs of Sydney. Very much the middle class household, Catholic school educated. Although, going into the trades, probably don't know if I needed that, but yeah, that's sort of, I guess, the background of me. I really have always had that underlying issue with anger the whole way through my childhood. So that really came out around the age of 24 when I had my, I guess, breakdown/breakthrough.
Okay, just I'd love to know a little bit more about your entrepreneurship journey and whether you actually consider yourself an entrepreneur. You run a successful business, and most of our audience are actually entrepreneurs. So could you give us a bit of background on your sort of journey there?
Yeah, I think most entrepreneurs, business owners will definitely understand this. I've always had just absolutely wild ambition and drive, but I guess part of my issue was it was never directed anywhere. So as soon as I finished my plumbing license at the age of 22, I started my business. I guess with absolutely no education, with nothing. It was just a demand thing, like as soon as you finish your apprenticeship, you start to get, cashies coming in on weekends. And then, yeah, it sort of very quickly turned into a business. I definitely do consider myself an entrepreneur now. I guess probably in the last 18 months, 2 years, when I sought and went through a couple of business coaches. One in particular has really helped me. I was in a business coaching group for about 3 years, and the business has just come leaps and bounds in that last 3 years. So yeah, I definitely consider myself that now.
Nice. I've got a few questions around coaches and mentors, which we'll get through a little later. Tell me about your book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, it's a funny one. It started out as more of a journal for myself, a bit of reflection, I guess. We'll probably go into a little bit more as the podcast goes on, but I went down a spiritual journey after my big breakthrough at 24. I ended up becoming a Reiki master, which is, I'm probably the first plumber Reiki master in Australia. But anyway, so, as most people do, they go into the reflection, the journaling, that kind of stuff. And the way I was writing it was more of a book, and about my story. I sat there, I laughed, I cried. It was a really big purge. And it wasn't until I spoke to a good mate of mine. She had just published her own book, and she introduced me to Dave, my publisher, and I said, mate, do you want to have a look over this for me? And instantly he's just said, mate, there's definitely something in this that's very relatable to a lot of guys. So went back, really tidied it up, turned it into a book. It's very much around my story, but there's elements of it that I know that anybody can pick up and go, you know what, I've done that in my life. I've done that in my life, and where that led them to. So yeah, it's come out. And when I first wrote it, my whole goal was, if I got great feedback and if I changed one person's life, I've achieved what I set out to do. And 2 weeks after I launched it, I was on site, I was having a chat to a builder, and I could tell there was just something not really great with him. And I had my last copy in the car, and I just gave it to him. I said, mate, go and read this. And yeah, 3 days later, he rang me and said, mate, I read your book in a night. I booked in and I saw someone the next day, and you've changed my life.
Man,
and I just went, wow. And since the book's launched, that's probably 8 weeks ago, I've had feedback like that on a couple of occasions, and that side of things really hasn't sunk in for me yet, but I know it's something I'm sitting with at the moment and just letting it come to me. I did a talk on last Saturday for Beyond Blue, and I had a guy, probably I'd say early 50s. After my talk, he came up and sat next to me and looked me in the face and just started to cry. And I said, mate, do you want to go outside and we'll have a bit of a chat? And he just said, look, you've just opened up so much stuff in me that I know that I need to go and get sorted. So I don't know how long he's been carrying that kind of stuff around with him, but obviously the book and the talking off the back of that is relatable and sort of hits home for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. I think just listening to someone else's story, by doing that, it sort of allows you the space to then share yours and actually look at your own sort of struggles. And I mean, I've got another business aside from this recruitment business where we train people, and I've trained hundreds of people in the last few years. And just as a sort of comparison, we don't train on mental health or anything, but when we've got these big groups of people getting trained and one person puts their hand up and goes, I actually don't know how to do this, or I'm struggling with this, you can see the rest of the room go, oh, actually, we are too. But it takes that one person to go, I'm really struggling with this. And I think that's why it's so important, books like yours and people like you sharing your story, because it just allows other people to go, actually, yeah, I'm struggling too. And Dan, I was listening to another episode that you did a couple of days ago, and you shared your story, and you've mentioned it here, the breakthrough that you had at 24, which really resonated with me, because I think you were talking about the lead up to that breakthrough. So sort of starting a business, getting married at a young age, a lot of pressure. And I think that's something everyone can relate to in one way, shape or form. Could you give us a bit of an overview as to what happened, sort of lead up to that, and then what the breakthrough for you was?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it as brief as possible, but as I mentioned earlier, I was a very angry teenager. Obviously through learned experiences and environments and that kind of stuff. A real pivotal point in my life was I found a guy when I went for an early morning surf one day with a mate of mine, and he died in the surf. So 6 a.m, a mate and I, we paddled out directly behind Wynn Stadium in Wollongong. We pulled him in, and then once the police turned up, we found a suicide note. So that sort of set me on a bit of a path of questioning a lot around life and beliefs and stuff like that. It led to a few experiences as a teenager. A girl I was quite close with in high school handed me a suicide note. which we were able to thankfully get her help, and she's still here today, which is amazing. At the age of 19, I had to physically restrain my brother-in-law from jumping off an overpass at Darling Harbour. So there was a fair few traumatic events there, all while I'm trying to deal with my own stuff. So as I mentioned earlier, in the same year, I think I was 23. Yeah, I got married. We bought our second property, and I started a business. So trying to start a business, trying to renovate a property, and the complexities, I guess, around a new marriage and being so young was all pressure. And I know a lot of people are feeling that at the moment. It doesn't matter what the pressure is coming from, it still affects people differently. Mm-hmm. So for me, my wife then turned around and said, look, I want to go and enjoy my early 20s. Let's go on a European holiday. Mm. And I just said, babe, I can't. I've just started a business. I'm not in a real great mental state to go and do that. So it was that sort of sliding door moment, right? Like, do I lose my business or do I lose my wife? Like, where are we sort of sitting? The two of us weren't getting along at all. So, you know, was the holiday going to be a chance for us to connect, or was it going to be a relationship breaker? So I sort of compromised and I said, look, you go and spend some time with your friends on a Kentucky tour. I'm going to get this business up off the ground. So she went for, I think it was 5 weeks. But in that time, my obviously experiences with suicide, that wasn't the path I wanted to go. Like somebody, you know, a 15-year-old kid finding me and what that sort of had effect on his life, I've already been through. So for me, I planned my own escape. So I was going to go and start a completely new life in Perth, change my name, the whole lot, like just leave everything behind. But I guess the real problem with that is I'm taking myself and my problems to Perth. So I was lucky that about a month before, a chick mate of mine, she gave me an emotion coach's number who lives in my area. And it was actually the day that I planned my escape. About 40 minutes before, I rang him and I said, mate, I need you to help me or convince me why I'm not going to, you know, turn left when I should be turning right. The phone call was exactly what I needed, and I went straight to his office and had this absolutely amazing experience where the weight of the world just came off my shoulders. I had to sit in my car for about an hour and a half after the session with him and sort of just gather my thoughts. The issue back then was he didn't have a system of what to do after. So it was essentially like he'd thrown myself and a whole bunch of airplane parts off the cliff, and I had to build a plane before I hit the ground. So that was an experience all in itself after it. But yeah, that was definitely the huge breakthrough moment for me.
Oh, mate, I'd love to ask you questions about the breakthrough moment. But before I do, why? Because similarly, I've been in that boat. Probably not, it's not going to be the exact same. But years ago, when I was leading this business and I was their COO, everything should have been amazing because I'd gotten this epic role. And I remember getting the role thinking, fuck, now what? I've just been chasing this goal of becoming a C-suite COO, and now I've got it. And I literally just wanted to go, fuck all of this. I just want to go move countries, move to Canada and start again. But I'd love to ask you why you think it took you, because presumably that's a build-up of things where you've just been ignoring them and you get to a stage where you need a breakthrough. Why do you think it is so hard, specifically for men, to acknowledge that they might need help along that time before it gets to breaking point, before you get to that moment where you're like, I'm just going to abscond and start a new life?
Yeah, so we're not given the space. So recently, over the last couple of years, I've been running some men's groups, and that is the ideal space for just to check in, just to see how people are tracking. We don't condition ourselves in a society to do that as men. Sort of, the only catch-ups you really have with other men is with your mates down the pub, and that's really not the time or the space to open up. It's more, you might put shit on your mate about his footy team or whatever it might be, but you never go skin deep. So I don't want to go, I guess, too much into it, but if you look back into generations and times gone past, look at the Aboriginals, for example. They used to have dedicated men's circles, dedicated women's circles, and they never sort of interacted. We've sort of lost that ability to do that. So I think guys now just bottle everything up. And the new word that everyone's throwing around is resilience. And yes, it is fantastic, and you need to have resilience as a business owner. But I'm finding time and time again, when business owners think that they need to reach out for help, this word resilience keeps coming up. And it's nearly like the resilience piece is, have a teaspoon of cement and harden up. It's not a time to come and be vulnerable and open up and talk to us about what's actually really affecting you. It's more, no, you need to be more resilient. So I'm sort of trying to break down that, how people perceive the word resilience as well. So yeah, sort of get where I'm going with that.
Oh, absolutely, mate. I think, yeah, you're so right. I mean, I'm connected with like 9,000 people on LinkedIn. The word resilience will come
It's
up
been driven down your
at
throat.
least 10 times a week. And it does, it has connotations of, you kind of just need to suck it up and get on with it. And that's what it feels like when people use it in certain terms.
Yeah, and I know it's, so the Resilience Project, I guess, we'll mention them. I think people have taken that out of context. Like Hugh's come out and done it in an amazing way. And I think people have just grabbed that and gone, oh, I need to go and be more resilient. No, you actually need to go in and listen to his teachings and his stories to actually understand what resilience is. And he will even tell you, and it's on his podcast, it's on his books, that it is actually about, putting your hand up and going to get help. That is the resilience piece. Yeah.
Right, that's such a good point. And I mean, I've recruited for hundreds of business owners in the last 7-8 years. And for me, the strongest ones, and actually the most successful ones and the happiest ones, are the ones that have got the ability to be vulnerable. And I think that word isn't used enough, because I think that then, on the opposite side, vulnerability has connotations to weakness. And as a leader, I think you're told, you can't show any vulnerability. You need to be the person steering the ship. But there does seem to be a bit of a shift with the business owners over the last few years that I've seen, that are sort of opening up and being more vulnerable with their teams.
Oh, definitely, I agree. Like the more I get out of my guys, I get more out of my guys by the vulnerable piece than anything else. Before my breakthrough, I was that, I guess, tyrant, you must do this, you must do that. But you get that back in return, right? Whereas the real vulnerable piece, letting the guys in, I guess, showing them your mission, what you're all about, you really get so much more buy-in. And you can say to you guys, look, I don't know that piece, but I'm going to find out and I'm going to ask for help. And it sort of sets that precedence for the guys to go, okay, well, rather than going to a job and completely effing it up, I am going to ask for a bit of help to get a better outcome for the customer. So there's so much more to it than, you as a leader really must lead in that piece, right? And if they can see that you're being vulnerable and you ask for help, they will do the same.
It's kind of like the parent and kid, isn't it? People learn from watching other people's behaviours.
Yeah.
If you're at the helm and you're sort of bottling everything up and going toughen up and suck it up, your team will not ask for help, or if they're struggling, they will not open up to you.
Yeah, well, if you had your dad or you had your first manager, for example, saying, you know, the only way you can do things is do it yourself, and you know it'll be right. Those kind of old stories will definitely hold people back from ever growing a business to allow them to have team around them, because the delegation piece will never happen because it's an old story holding them back.
But would you say you ran your business differently from when you started it to now? And what would you say the biggest difference is in how you run it and how you interact with the team? And what sort of effects have you seen from that change?
Like, mate, the two businesses are chalk and cheese. So I guess I was attracting the type of people in the business that I was, I guess. So that's the first piece. So I guess if you want to really call it new Dan, old Dan, the new piece is really attracting an aligned culture with aligned people that understand what we're trying to achieve. You know, I've even sat the guys down and showed them the numbers of the business, what it costs if, you know, we have a callback. So they really understand that piece and have buy-in. You know, guys, if you continue to have callbacks, I can't give you pay rises and that will affect your mortgages. For an example, the old business was run very much around, you know, that old school 80s, 70s, 80s thinking where you're a real tyrant and this is what you're going to be doing and really suppressing your staff. Whereas now it's very much a team buy-in. The three girls in the office are absolutely amazing. I've learned to really delegate. The guys on the road know that nothing's off limits. If they ring me at 12 o'clock at night and they've got an issue with a girlfriend or whatever that's going to affect their next day, I want them to call me. Yeah, so it's very much around that, being a real supportive leader on that side of the business. So, you know, that's probably been the new Dan's been, you know, 7-8 years in business, and yeah, it's going really, really well.
And I imagine your team are less likely than others across your industry to move businesses. I mean, having recruited hundreds of people leave leaders.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling supported by the person that you're working with and for, you're much less susceptible to being sort of poached by your competitors.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I've had one of my guys, he's been with me since the start, basically. And about 3 months ago, I gave him a copy of the book before I launched it. And I got a message off him, it was probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night one night, and said, it was something along the lines of, Dan, I want you to know I'm fully supporting of you. You really deserve the world out of this business and I'm here to support you. And that absolutely blew me away. He's obviously been around and seen the change in what was to what is. And he's obviously a very integral part of my crew. He's, you know, site foreman, the whole lot. He's running a couple of guys underneath him, and he struggled himself with some mental health issues a couple of years ago. And my big thing is, if any of my guys are struggling, I will pay for the first couple of sessions for them to go and see somebody. So there's been a huge shift in him as well. So, you know, he's about to embark on his next stage of his journey. He's got a kid on the way. So, you know, I'm definitely here to help him sail that ship as well.
Right, and you just mentioned that sort of you'll support your team and get them sort of someone to talk to. When listening to your episode a few days ago, that seems to be a real pivotal turning point for you, opening up to that chap. I can't remember his name, but opening up to that chap, and you said it was a huge turning point for you. Why do you think it was so important for you to have that conversation with someone? And I'm not asking about what you spoke about, but if there's anything you can share around that as to why it was so pivotal for you to have that initial conversation and what it sort of did for you.
Is that with Scott you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I'll put it quite bluntly. As a very angry 24-year-old, I wasn't in a very male dominated industry. I wasn't in a headspace for somebody to turn around and say, "Dan, you need to go and see a psychologist." And again, there's nothing wrong with that side of things. I know they help a lot of people, but just for me in that exact moment, I could not think of anything worse. It made my skin crawl. Scott is very different. He's an emotion coach. He's 6'2", 120 kilos, covered in tattoos. But the crazy thing is, I walked into his office and he was shit scared of me. Now, I'm 85 kilos. I'm not a tall guy, but just that aura that I had around me was just, my wife said the same thing. It was at times scary. Now, I would never, ever lay a hand on a woman, my wife, anything like that. But just that aura that I had around me was just dark and scary. And in that hour and a bit session that we had together, we really spoke about emotions. We released a lot of emotions that I'd had bottled up. And I was carrying around a lot of beliefs that actually weren't mine. And we really tapped into that side of things as well. And honestly, I don't think I could ever replicate or show anyone what that felt like to have the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. But I can guarantee you in that moment was the moment that it was like the fork in the road, right? It was like he dragged me back from the far left and we're shooting down the far right. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Dan, what do you think? I mean, you're a business owner, you lead a team. And I think most business owners, aside from their own personal experiences with mental ill health, it's hard to recognize when someone in your team is struggling. What would you say in your experience, if we've got a business owner listening right now, and they would be asking for advice on, well, how do I spot the signs that someone in my team is struggling with poor mental health? Because often people hide it really well, don't they?
Yeah, they do, and they are very subtle signs, but I guess as you learn people and as you start to learn yourself even more, you can start to identify these things, right? So for me, recently, I had an apprentice that I really suspected of smoking pot. Now, everything comes down to perspective. So I knew he'd slip up at some stage. I can't target him with drug testing because obviously that's illegal. And he was on the maintenance side of the business. So it's not like he's on sites that do run regular drug tests. So he did slip up and he sent me a text message that was supposed to go to a mate of his. So my response was, "Hey mate, I'll see you in the office at 7 a.m. tomorrow." So instantly we're at a fork in the road again, right? So I said to him, left is I can sack you right now because I have the evidence to do that. But let's go down the right-hand path. I'll show you what that looks like and you can decide which way we go. And I said, obviously there's some mental health issues behind the reason why you're using drugs. So I want you to go, I'm going to pay for you to go and see someone for a couple of sessions. I want you to guarantee me that you're clean. I'm going to drug test you in 6 weeks. I am going to sit and mentor you through your TAFE. And you've got my phone number. So if there's any issues through the night, call me. And he had tears in his eyes because he said to me, I've never had anyone mentor me like that before. I know his background. He didn't grow up in the most stable household in the world, and he's had a few challenges just in his own life. So I guess as business owners, leaders, if I sat this kid, what does his life look like? Does he go down a path of heavier drugs? And I'm not saying that we need to save everybody, but on the flip side of that, I now have an employee that turns up before he's asked. He goes the extra mile. He really drives the culture in the business and will never speak ill of the business or anyone in it to clients, and the clients love him. So I've now got an employee that I know will be around for a very long time. So it's really about looking after you guys.
That's such a nice example, mate. And yeah, I mean, just from hearing that story, he'd have complete commitment to you. He'd have a lot of respect. Someone actually cared enough to go through that process with him. Because yeah, you're right. As a business owner, you could have just gone, this is too risky for us. We can't have this person in business. They're doing this, this, this. And I think most people would have chosen the other route rather than the being kind and supportive.
Ultimately, it does come down to a point. Like, you as a business owner, if they're taking the piss out of you after you've tried to help, then it's back on them, and you have to look after yourself and the business. But that first initial, I want to help you and see where that goes, I think we owe it to them and ourselves to try.
Absolutely.
Because I think like small business in Australia is the highest employer. Now, if we change a couple of people in our businesses' lives and their mental health state, that changes a huge percentage of the population.
God, and I was reading just from a business perspective, just the amount of hours, productivity, and all of that stuff that is lost due to mental ill health. Some crazy stats out there about how many people actually suffer from mental health.
Well, that's only the people they know about, right?
Yeah. But what would you say is going too far? Or let me rephrase that. We did this webinar with a mental health expert, a clinical psychologist. And one of the questions in the chat from one of the business owners that were on that call was, what's going too far and how far do you push it? But because you can only help someone if they want to be helped, right?
Correct.
And how do you approach that when you can see someone is struggling and perhaps they don't want to acknowledge it? There's that fine balance, of you want to help them, but how do you bring that conversation up? I guess it comes down to, one, you've got to be quite aware emotionally yourself to have those conversations. Any advice around that, mate?
Yeah, and that's the real huge one, right? So as I was saying, you can't be taking the piss out of. That's 100%. If it's affecting your clientele, your business as a whole in a very serious manner, like if there's huge safety concerns, that's where I guess serious action needs to be taken. And if that's going down the disciplinary path, then it has to go down that path. But it's all about planting that seed. So as you said, people are only going to go and get help when they acknowledge that there's a problem. Sometimes it's about gently putting that mirror up in front of them and showing them a pathway that you think they're on. Planting that seed and to see if it is going to actually change them. if it doesn't, and you know that nothing's changing and it is really affecting the business, well, you're going to have to turn around and either terminate or what that looks like in your business. That's your call. But I definitely think that initial steps to plant the seed have to be taken.
Yeah. Hey, I've got one more question before our last one. I was reading up on your history. You're in plumbing business typically, and I think looking outside in, you presume the trades as quite a masculine environment, not willing to open up about things. It's that kind of environment where I would just presume the majority are quite masculine and expect themselves just to get on with it. What was the reaction from your peers when you started opening up about this stuff? Was it received? Did you have any sort of pushback? What was the general sort of gist of people when you started opening up about this, both from within your team and just peers outside of your business?
Yeah, so I guess when I knew that I was, onto something was just after my really big breakthrough. I went down to Canberra with a mate of mine to a truck show. Part of his business, they all met up, washed all the trucks, did all that kind of stuff the afternoon before. And we were all sitting around in the shed. There was probably 20 guys. And I don't know how we got on the topic, but I ended up telling them my story. And I basically looked at 20 jaws that hit the ground. And a few of the guys had never been spoken to in that way and never really had anyone, A, be vulnerable or B, hold space. And you could see right then and there that it changed a few guys and the trajectory of their lives. And since then, I'm very much the first person to walk in, and if there's an opportunity to see something, be vulnerable or hold that energy, sort of that space, it's amazing to see what comes out. Taking one of you guys to a cafe and just having that chat, they will open up and tell you things that they didn't think they'd ever be able to tell you, because it is in that really safe space. So for guys, it's about creating that space, and it may be a one-on-one in the sheds. It may be one-on-one at a cafe. They may benefit from a group of guys at a toolbox talk, for example, and one guy has opened the conversation. It's been received amazingly well. I'm getting builders that I worked with 4 and 5, 6 years ago ring me and say, Dan, I've read your book while I was at home, and this and this story really affected me, and I want to go back and revisit that happened in my life. So it's about really creating that vulnerable space. I think it's sort of become in society that masculinity has really sort of become enemy number one. They've labeled it toxic masculinity. And I understand there are elements of it that are. However, a masculine energy is still the protector, still that kind of male role in society. And I think we've nearly been made to feel that we should really suppress that and just get on with it. And it's not right for our mental health. We're wired a certain way as men. Women are wired a certain way. That's how they think. That's how they talk. We think and talk like this. So it's really about creating that space for them to be able to open up.
I love that. It's so nice to hear that it's been received well and it's allowed others to open up. And I think that's why I was really excited to do this episode with you, because I think conversations like this that people hear is one of the best things you can do. because it does, as you said, it allows people that sort of space. And yeah. Right, my last question to you, and we ask this to all of our podcast guests, and I didn't prepare you because I forgot to send you this question. What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
It's funny, I got asked this question after a keynote speech last Saturday. And there was a guy from the audience came up and said, "What would you change about your life?" And I really wouldn't change anything. And I don't know if the advice that I would give from a 32-year-old's perspective to my 18-year-old self would have actually been received anyway. I really feel that the experiences that I've been through, the traumas that I've seen, the breakthroughs and the journey that I've been post have really been for a reason, and they really talk to my purpose now. And that's really about changing men's mental health. And I'm not saying that just because I don't want to help women's mental health. I just really understand the men's side of things. I think they're both very much related, but I know that space really well. So I can speak to them from experience and know that it's come from a place of authenticity and relatability. So that's how I know that I'll make change.
I love that answer. Genuinely, thank you so much for coming on and sharing openly, giving us the time. I really think it's been a very valuable chat. And if anyone wants to connect with Dan, we'll pop his details in the info on the podcast. We'll pop a link to his book as well, The Censored Tradie. But Dan, thank you so much, mate. Really, really appreciate your time. It's been a really good chat.
Thank you so much for having me on.